What would you do if you had $50 million? Over 160 New Zealanders have to decide that every day of the week. But it'd take a family on the median household income over 500 years just to save that much. So, are the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer? And if you're poor, is there a way out of that poverty? Good evening, welcome to the first Prime Time. It's a sugar daddy and FJK free zone. We'll be here every Friday with intelligent debate on the major issues confronting this country during the election campaign. Auckland's North Shore. These are the kind of houses the $50 million rich listers like to live in. But travel west just 25 kilometres and these people can only dream about that sort of money. The Salvation Army says 1 in 5 New Zealanders now live in benefit-dependent households. But statistics show that New Zealand isn't becoming more unequal. Inequality rose dramatically during the free market free-for-all of the 80s and 90s, but has stayed pretty much the same for the entire term of this government. Instead, government critics are focusing in on child poverty. At a minimum, child poverty campaigners want to see benefits inflation indexed and working for families' tax credits extended to those who are getting benefits. They're also critical of a fundamental plank of the government's social policy, which focuses on getting those on benefits into paid work. So, is welfare a hand up or a handout? With us is the architect of the government's social policy reforms, Social Development Minister Paula Bennett. Paula, good evening.
Good evening.
And a vocal critic of her approach, Greens co-leader Materia Ture. To keep us all honest in this debate, we've got some experts. From the right is Greg Fleming, the former CEO of the Maxim Institute, now CEO of the Venn Foundation, a faith-based social action initiative. And from the other side of the fence, I guess, Alan Johnson from the good old Salvation Army, the Sallies. Alan, nice to have you with us. Paula, I want to start with you. There are two narratives, it would seem to me, when we have a discussion about poverty and inequality, and that is that poverty and inequality are real and growing because your government doesn't care. And the narrative I imagine that you have is that it might be real, but it's manageable and under control because the government does. Looking at the figures, are you prepared to accept those who say child poverty, social inequality is a huge issue in this election and in this country right now?
I think it is definitely an issue, and I think there are children and families that are living in hardship and are not living the kind of lives that we as New Zealanders think everyone should get a go and a fair go and be living with that kind of well-being and just a reasonable standard of living.
Is it an issue, and I noticed you didn't say huge issue, you said an issue, is it an issue you believe your government has made real progress on in the past 5 years?
I think that we have maintained through that global financial crisis and, the worst conditions that we have seen for a very, very long time. I mean, we spent $1 billion more on welfare in that couple of years because we needed to. We had people that never thought they would be on welfare needing help. We helped them with hardship grants, we have helped them with accommodation supplements and extra costs. So I think we stepped up when they needed it. But we have intergenerational welfare dependence. The poverty hasn't happened in the last 3 years, all of it, and it certainly hasn't happened in the last 10.
Do you believe you are making an impact in changing, for example, intergenerational welfare?
Yes, I do, because we are targeting at the most complex and at the hardest end. That doesn't always happen overnight. So we've maintained, we're helping those people keep their heads above water in most cases, and now we're making a real difference on that harder end.
Materia Ture, Paula Bennett says we acknowledge the problem, we've dealt with it, we've held the line and we're making progress. Do you buy it?
Not for 1 minute. What you see with the figures is that inequality and poverty massively increased after the mother of all budgets in '91, and there has been no change to it since then. We have had a
relatively flat on the figures we've got.
It's a 30-year failure is what those figures show, that government after government, none have made a difference to bring those numbers down. I'm not satisfied with 1 in 4 children living in poverty. That is not a good thing. We should not say that that's okay.
Most statistics show they're dropping, though.
Well, actually, 1 in 4 children are still living in poverty, and not only that, the number of children in severe poverty is increasing. That means we are not doing okay for those families, and it's not tolerable. I'm in politics to bring that number down, not to keep it the same and pretend that we're maintaining something good. It's bad in New Zealand.
Greg Fleming, I know you have argued that part of the problem with this debate and this policy area is that we cannot even quantify or agree on how to quantify the problem itself.
There's certainly been a huge amount of debate over the years as to how to measure poverty. I don't think that that is actually a point of disagreement so much now. If I refer to Alan's State of the Nation report from the Salvation Army, there does seem to be fairly good agreement around how to measure poverty. But I would say I'm not in politics. I'm actually at the coalface to address child poverty, because there is a real limit around what government can actually do. I do think that what the government has been doing over the last 6 years is generally in the right direction, but the area that I'd love to see more investment in is in those organisations that are in the third sector, those non-profit organisations that are actually dealing with the drivers of poverty.
Alan Johnson, the Sallies, you're at the coalface of this. Whose narrative do you buy? That we've kept it under control and we've got ourselves through a tough period in terms of dealing with people in need and child poverty, or that this is an ongoing failure and nothing fundamentally has been done to turn the ship around?
I think if you listen to Paula and Materia, that's talking about the same side of different side of the same coin. Effectively, what they're saying is, you know, it hasn't got worse and it hasn't got better, and I think our experience would suggest that's the case. We certainly saw a spike in people coming looking for assistance from us as a result of the GFC, and we haven't seen that subside since. So
the spike has remained?
Yes, it has. And particularly, for example, if you look at food bank use, people coming in asking, you know, seeking for assistance to basically give their children food tonight.
Okay.
So, and those numbers haven't dropped. They haven't gone up. You know, there was this huge rise straight after the GFC and the massive increase in unemployment, and you know, those numbers are much the same.
That's not exactly an encouraging report from the coalface.
Well, except that we have 60,000 fewer people on welfare now than we did 3 years ago. We have 30,000 fewer children living in welfare-dependent homes. That is something that will make a significant difference to those families. The reality is that you know, we have no doubt the great work that people like the Salvation Army and others do. We have a huge amount of respect for that and work in partnership with them. But actually a lot of our problems that we have are over time and are entrenched. And it's not going to be one quick, short thing that I know the left would like to see us do, but actually it is complicated. Right, well, there's a lot of things being done. You know, the reality is that we maintain benefits, we actually give extra assistance where it's needed. We do things like breakfast in all schools, we do things like warming up those houses, we've done things like social workers in all lower decile schools. I mean, that list is long, right? So we do our bit, now we've got to get into that targeted, complicated stuff. See, throwing a bit of money at everyone will not work.
There's a couple of examples. Those 30,000 children that Paula talks about, we have no idea, she has no idea, her ministry has no idea what the circumstances are for those children. What we do know is that there are 35,000 more children living in severe poverty, that 2 out of every 5 children who are in poverty are in working households, so families who work, like we saw with that Nigel Latta documentary with that family, both work full-time, both on low pay, still not able to pay to make sure their kids have got lunch every day. But I would just challenge Paula on one issue. She talked about targeting assistance to the children who need it most. This budget, this government and Paula refused to give a $20 a week payment for 10 weeks to the poorest babies, newborn babies, who own officials said to her, this $20 a week extra for 10 weeks for these babies, newborn babies, will make a huge difference to these families. It will improve their life outcomes. It will go towards helping buy nappies, it'll go towards helping provide the food for the breastfeeding mothers. They said that it was the right thing to do. Treasury said it was the right targeted thing to do. And Paula said no.
Which I guess comes to another fundamental difference in the political discussion we have, and that is that it seems the centre-left and the left say money, more money in someone's pocket creates equality.
Income does matter when you are the most poor and really struggling. So that's why Treasury said this was the right kind of payment to make to these targeted families.
I'm sorry, but that bit of the handout is actually going to... We will have the same situation in 10, 20 years' time. What it is about is actually targeting the right support early enough and making sure that we're turning around those lives in a sustainable way.
I think we've come to a great place to take a quick break. Oh, everyone. And I think we're getting down to it now. We're going to talk about the difference between hand up and hand out after the break. Be back with you very, very soon. Welcome back to Prime Time. Well, before the break, things were getting heated about whether or not money is the only answer to the problem of poverty and social inequality. I think we're all agreed around this table that it is not a good thing and that however you measure it, there is a problem there. Materia, you'd be, I guess, looking at Paula Bennett, even in a personal sense, that the government has gone backwards in terms of helping, for instance, solo mothers get out of poverty.
Well, that's exactly right. So Paula and I both were on the DPB when our babies were little. We both used education as the route out of poverty, and it is. Income, education and housing are the solutions. But Paula, you know, in her own story, talks about how she left a full-time job to go on the DPB so that she could study. And I think that, you know, those kinds of opportunities for young women who don't have any other choices for support, I think that was the right route for
Minister,
Paula.
under current and
Can't happen now.
Under current and intended policies, could you do that?
Yeah, so we've changed it, which is really exciting. So what we've done is made sure that the student allowance now is equal to the DPB. So that means people can actually we've now got the evidence that says that if you go from welfare and track on to student allowance, your likelihood of ever going back onto welfare is way less. So those women do have a track to study and to cut out the
you
time on benefit.
You could do exactly what you did.
That's not
pretty
true.
much.
No,
yeah.
that's not true.
Well, better than what I had, actually.
It's not true.
Well, it is. It's actually better than what I had. So that's the truth.
For example, the training incentive allowance, which we both used, I understand, I certainly did, allowed for me to be supported while I was doing my tertiary education degree. Paula has cut the training incentive allowance for tertiary degree study. Because of the recession, actually, it would be great to get clarity from you that you will reinstate the training incentive allowance.
I don't need to, because I've got a better path now for women to be getting into work that's far more sustainable.
Alan Johnson.
That's not what I hear from the women I talk to. It's not what I hear from the women I talk to.
Well, it's true. And it'll be starting next year. And you can try and bring the personal into it. But the reality is there's a much better path for women to, A, get off benefit. And when we see, this is actually really important, we have the lowest number of sole parents on benefit now that we have had since 1988.
But no evidence
they are getting off benefit, they are getting into work, and they are substantially better off. I do not want them a lifetime on welfare.
Yeah.
Those women,
and that, quite frankly, is cutting in a life that will not be sustainable.
I want to go to our experts now.
By you,
I first want to get your comment, Alan, on an issue we talked about earlier. Is it just money that makes the difference for people in poverty? Or is it also an issue of attitude and environment?
I mean, I guess we see people who come in and are beaten in a number of ways. You know, they're beaten spiritually, they're beaten in terms of the morale, and they're struggling financially. And I guess what we really do need, and the Army and the government funds some of this, is wraparound services for vulnerable families, making certain that they're picked up both in terms of financial and material ways, but also...
So this isn't solved by an extra $10 a week?
I think an extra $10 a week would make a difference. I mean, the reality is we see people coming in for assistance every day of the week. They go into WINS offices looking for supplementary assistance. It's clear that the benefits aren't sufficient to meet all living costs, particularly in high areas with high housing costs, and that's something that hasn't been talked about. Benefits haven't risen to reflect the high costs of rents, and particularly in Auckland and Christchurch. And so money would make a difference, but I agree it's not the only thing that's required.
Greg Fleming, I want to come to you, and Paula, you spoke very passionately about women on the DPB, and people on all sides of that argument get hot about it. I guess the question I want to ask you, and I want to ask to Greg Fleming, if you have fewer young mothers, fewer teens who see it as a lifestyle option, Do you think that is an issue of removing the financial incentive that some people talk about for people to live that way?
I don't know too many people actually choose to go into that lifestyle. I think often, and most often, life delivers that to people. I concur with what Alan's saying, and that is that poverty, I mean, real poverty in this country, and that's the saddest thing. We talk about the bottom 20%, but there's a bottom 6 or 7% in this country who, without intensive help, without the intensive wraparound services of the kind that Sally's are doing, that I've got the privilege of being involved in now in Manarewa, those families simply aren't able to actually lift themselves out, or even to be able to allocate and actually use the resources that are given to them, because the international research is pretty clear that the major drivers of poverty are indeed joblessness, educational underachievement. Yes, you've got debt and you've got addiction, but there is another one, and it's relational instability. And because there's a moral dimension to it, we are so wary in this country of going there, and yet we need to. And I mean, Alan's just opened the door there with his use of the term spiritual and emotional. That emotionally they've been beaten up. I don't think it is a moral judgment to want to help people.
Are you suggesting that less divorce, more stable relationships
Absolutely.
are going to reduce the gaps?
Absolutely. I see this every day in our work in Manarewa. I see families when they are sustained, and this isn't about imposing a family structure on people, and it isn't actually about a moral judgment.
Yeah, I wonder how the solo mother who brought up her daughter sitting next to you feels about that.
Well, I was going to say, we have fewer teen mums than we've had since the 1960s. So we have a 30% drop in the number of teen births in this country, which is just absolutely outstanding. I'm not going to get into the spiritual or moral, but what I will say is every evidence points to to how a child will do. One of the key determinants are the age of the mother, the stability of the relationship, whether she's got an education or work history behind her. So now every teen mum, those that do have their babies, have a mentor, have someone that helps them with budgeting advice, has someone that helps them with parenting, and wraps support around them. And I am most excited about what we're seeing there. So we don't just leave them off on their own. We are spending a lot of money, but every bit of evidence says it's the best thing we can do. I love those babies. The best thing we can do is actually love their mums
but
and look after them.
Those single parents are not raising children alone. They're doing it in the context of wider whānau and community relationships that are actually assisting them in that. And that is why I'm a big fan of that particular approach in terms of targeting welfare.
In practice, I've been to a teen parent unit this week. I've been into WINS this week to see what is actually happening on the ground, and actually solo these young women, but actually solo mothers, because most solo mothers are people who've had relationships that have broken down. They're not young. They are the system just puts more and more pressure on them. These young ones are finding it struggling to have the money to get to their courses, which if they don't get to, they have their benefits cut. I've already had one woman come to me whose benefit has been cut as a result of not being able to get to her course because she doesn't have the money for the transport because it's so controlled.
What is the answer then?
Well, the answer
more
is
relationship counselling, making men better husbands and more lovable.
No, the answer is
stepping up a little more
in welfare. The answer is putting children at the heart of welfare, so that whatever decision is being made, it's on the basis of the best interests of the child, not on trying to save money in welfare, which is
I want to bring Alan Johnson in here. The Salvation Army say the best interest of the child are that the child is brought up in a stable two-parent household.
No, the Army wouldn't say that.
Okay.
They wouldn't, because sometimes those things aren't feasible in the relationships that have created a child. And sometimes it's not appropriate for that to happen, particularly if there's violence and abuse and stuff. People need to get their lives together before they can be decent parents sometimes. And we would suggest that simply pairing people up and saying, well, your parents look after that child, isn't sufficient to ensure that that child is looked after. So sometimes, and most people who have been through a relationship breakdown would say, sometimes it's better that we break up. And I guess the thing is, and you raised the question of the behaviour of men and young men, I think in some respects what we've done, particularly for groups of men, young men, is we've sold them short. We've said, this is all we expect from you. We don't actually expect you to be decent fathers, and we don't actually...
Well, is that
we think you're going to bugger off,
so then the state is more than happy
No. I don't think you can blame the state. I think it's a cultural thing, and it's to do with subcultures in our community, not to do with whether it's Māori, Pacific or Pākehā or anything. There are some communities in this country, and I come from one, and and there are other communities where it's accepted that young men will have babies and not care and not
and
be
multiple
involved.
children to multiple girls as well, and not have responsibility.
Are not the ones who should suffer. And under the current welfare system, with the current welfare reforms, it is the children who pay the price. 205,000 New Zealand children living in severe poverty. It is not okay, and yet it continues.
It is not severe poverty.
MSD figures.
No, you're just throwing in those emotive words. But what we do have, if you actually get to the facts of it though as well, is that every bit of evidence says that actually the younger you have babies, so we are without a doubt spending more on those teenagers, spending more on the support around them, and we are seeing the results for it. So we will care and support for them.
The teenage pregnancy rate started dropping a long time before Paula brought in a more stringent access to benefits for young solo mums. The teenage pregnancy rate was falling 18 months before that. So I think what we're seeing, and I accept that Paula's changes, particularly around the way the DPB as a Minister for Young Mothers, have probably contributed to it, but I think we saw a cultural change happening in many of our communities that all of a sudden it was decided not to have children.
It's health and education and everyone else as well.
We've got to come towards some sort of conclusion. I want to give you, Materia Ture, the opportunity to tell me what you think the single most significant policy you have as regards closing the gaps and dealing with the issue of child poverty is.
You put children at the heart of every government decision that you make.
That's right.
You put children at the heart of the welfare system, not work first. You put children at the heart of housing, so you make sure that there is adequate warm, dry housing for every family who needs one. Well, this is it. Putting children at the heart of every. This is my commitment to the country at this election, is to put children at the heart of every decision we make.
More support earlier. So that means we look at what they can do, how we help them achieve that, more into education, more into supporting
and
those
I want to
mums and
ask
their
our
children.
experts, have either of you heard tonight, whether collectively or individually from these politicians, a real solution? Alan?
I haven't heard a real solution, to be honest, but what I have heard is a commitment across the political spectrum to children, and I think that's quite encouraging. We're not now denying it, such as we did in a previous administration, that child poverty existed. We are actually acknowledging it and addressing it.
Greg Fleming?
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that children already are at the centre of the policy. The most encouraging one for me tonight is coming to understand afresh just how targeted the current programs are, and what the commitment that there is going forward to ensuring that full whānau are actually supported.
Great. And it's up to you people to decide who convinced you, and that'll be a decision to make on polling day. I'd like to thank Paula Bennett, Materia Ture, Greg Fleming, and of course Alan Johnson. I'll be back after the break with a hot new competition and details of next week's show.